So in this note sheet, we're going to be going over how to graph inequalities. Our essential question is, how can I graph an inequality on a number line to show multiple solutions? So first we start with, well, what is an inequality? An inequality is a mathematical statement that describes the relationship between two numbers. They may or may not be equal to each other. So inequalities, we're not using this equal sign for. We're using different symbols, and we'll talk about those symbols later. An inequality shows many solutions. So when we were solving equations, we only ever got one answer, like x equals 3, y equals -7. But with inequalities, there's more than one answer. And so that's why we use a different symbol to write our answer. So the symbols that are used in inequalities are these four. And so each of these represents something different. You've been working with these since you were younger, so you might already remember what these are. But if you forgot, this one means less than. This one is greater than. This one is really similar to less than, but since it has this line underneath, this is less than or equal to. And this last one is really similar to greater than, but again, this little line underneath tells us that it's greater than or equal to. And so each of these symbols show a relationship between two different numbers. If we go back and look at the less than symbol, the small number is on the pointy side, and the big number, or the bigger number, is the one that the mouth is open to. If you remember in elementary school, they probably talked about inequalities like a little alligator mouth. The mouth is always open to the bigger number. So with the greater than symbol, the bigger number is first, the smaller number is on the right. It's not getting the pointy side of it. And so I'm just going to fill in. So with less than or equal to, the smaller number would be first. Greater than or equal to, the bigger number is first. So that's going to be important when we start looking at this next section. So how can we translate an inequality? Because that's going to be really important when we go to graph. So what we're going to want to do is start reading it from the variable. If you remember what a variable is, that's our letter. And so it's going to be really important that we remember that the mouth eats the bigger number. For example, we have x less than 7. So what that means is x is less than 7. Over here, we have x greater than or equal to -2. This means that x is greater than or equal to -2. This one's a little bit different though. If we look, it says 4 is less than x. But when we read these, we want to start by reading it from the variable. So we want to start by looking at where x is. If we look at the symbol, the mouth is eating x. So even though this says 4 is less than x, x is the bigger number because the mouth is eating x. So even though this says 4 is less than x, what it means is that x is greater than 4. X is the bigger number. If we look at this next example, it says negative 12 is greater than x. Again, we want to start reading it from our variable. If we look at x and we look at the symbol, x is getting the pointy side. The mouth is eating negative 12. That means negative 12 is bigger. If x is getting the pointy side, that means x is smaller. So even though this has a greater than symbol, when we read it from the variable and we look at where x is smaller, or x is less than negative 12. In the sidebar, you might want to put some helpful notes. If you see a number and then like this, a little cheat for that, this is always going to mean x is less than. If you have a number and then a symbol and then x like that, this will always mean x is greater than. So this is kind of like a little cheat code if you want to memorize that. So what I want you to do now is to pause the video, get caught up on your writing, and then attempt to write the sentences for these two on your own. So again, pause the video and write a sentence for each of these on your own. The sentences that you should have had, here is x, so this is going to be x is less than or equal to. X is less than or equal to 6. And then with this one, x is on the opposite side, but when I look at the symbol, the mouth is eating x, that means x is the bigger number, so x is greater than or equal to 10. And so that's a little bit about translating expressions. Again, this is going to be really important when we go to graph and we see that our variable is on the opposite side. So now we're going to flip on the back and take a look at the graphing. So how do we graph an inequality? When we graph an inequality, we're doing it to show all the possible solutions on a number line. We use an open or closed circle and an arrow that goes to the left or to the right. So if you remember, this was our less than symbol, and for this, we use an open circle. So it will look just like that. For greater than, it is also an open circle. When we have symbols like this, where the line's underneath, and so that means less than or equal to, that is when we will use a closed circle. So we're going to take our circle and then we're going to color it in. When we have our greater than or equal to symbol, again, this line underneath tells us that it could be equal to it, so that's also going to have a closed circle. So we'll draw our circle, and then we'll color it in. So depending on the symbol, you'll either have an open or closed circle at the number. When it gets to the arrow part, if the variable is less than, this means that the arrow goes to the left. So if the variable is less than, so that means that x could be less than a number, or if we started with the number, it would look like that. If the variable is greater than, the arrow goes to the right. So that means if x is greater than our number, or if the number comes first. It's like that. And so that's all that these graphs are made up of. It's a circle and an arrow. So I'm going to do 2 examples for you, and then I'm going to want you to try the other 2 examples on your own. So this inequality says x is less than 5. So x is less than 5. So if I think of some examples of numbers that are less than 5 or smaller than 5, the first ones that come to mind are 4, 3, and 2. So since my symbol is less than, that means I'm going to have an open circle at 5. And since x is less than 5, that means x is smaller. My arrow is going to be going to the left. It's going to be going towards 4, 3, and 2. And so my graph would look just like that. An open circle with an arrow going to the left. When I look at this next inequality, again, I'm going to start reading it from my letter. X is greater than or equal to -4. The mouth is open to x. That means x is the bigger number. So x is greater than or equal to -4. So when I think of some examples of numbers that are greater than or equal to -4, well, -4 is equal to -4. But then numbers that are bigger than -4 would be like -3 or even something like +3. Those are all bigger than -4. So when I go to do my graph, since I have that line underneath, I'm going to have a nice closed circle at -4. And since it's greater than or equal to, I'm going to be headed towards these numbers, -4, -3, and 3, which means my arrow is going to be headed to the right. So what I want you to do now is to pause the video, get caught up on your copying or your writing, and then I want you to try and graph these 2 inequalities below. So again, pause the video, get caught up on your writing, and graph these 2 inequalities down here below. I just noticed a typo here. This should say 3. That's my bad. But when you went to go read this inequality, I hope that you started with x. X is getting the pointy side. The mouth is away from x. That means x is the smaller number. So this means x is less than 3. And some examples are 2, 0, -4. You could have a lot of different numbers in here. It all just depends on what you chose. Your graph should have an open circle at 3 and should be going to the left. If your arrow was going to the right, that doesn't mean your answer was right. So we've got to pay really close attention, and we have to be really careful and pay attention to what our inequality is really saying. Because you might think, oh, it's close enough, my arrow is just going the wrong way. But that means a totally different thing. With this last one, this starts with x. X is greater than or equal to -2. Okay? So you could have had -2, you could have had 0, you could have picked 6. Again, there's lots of different numbers that are greater than or equal to -2. Since it's got that line underneath, you should have a closed circle at -2. And since it's greater than, we're going to be headed towards those bigger numbers. Your arrow should be going to the right. If you need help with this, again, ask questions in class the next time that you see me, or please, please, please stay after school so that we can review graphing inequalities.